Andrew Struthers is running for Mayor of Corvallis. What a neat opportunity to talk to a local resident who's also got a vision for our lovely community. Stay tuned. Hey folks, welcome. Today is a really fun opportunity. We're here talking with Andrew Struthers. Andrew, thank you for spending some time here.
Thank you, Michael, for having me. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Yes, and this is a special one. If you've watched our channel before, you've seen that we've done a number of what we call Oregon interviews. And so today is going to be part Oregon interview, talking with Andrew about being a Corvallis resident. But this is a special one because Andrew is a mayoral candidate. Am I using the verbiage right?
Yes, you are.
All right. So it's not only a neat opportunity to talk with a fellow Corvallis resident, but it's also a really neat opportunity to talk with somebody who's very much geared towards and dedicated towards public service. And I think it'll be really fun to get to hear more about what you want to impact and why you want to be spending your time in that regard in the community. So it's a particularly unique Oregon interview for our channel. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, and I'm excited for our conversation, so let's do this.
Yeah, let's dive right in. So first, I want to thank a mutual friend of ours, our realtor friend, Annalise. Realtors are great at networking, and she was like, I think that Team K should really talk with Andrew. And so, of course, we're realtors too. We help people buy and sell houses, but that's not the point of this video. What we want to do is be a resource for people who are thinking about moving here and a resource for people who are here in the community as well. And so it's fun to do a lot more than just sell houses using a YouTube channel. So Andrew, fill us in. We got to have lunch the other day, which was a great opportunity to talk with you, but refresh my memory. Are you born and raised in Corvallis? Are you a native Oregonian? What is your Oregon story in that regard?
Thanks, Michael. I am born and raised in Oregon. Was born in Albany, so just across the river, over in the hospital there. Pretty much was raised, I would say, in the Lynn County area. A couple of years in Albany, and then we moved over to Scioto, and then over to Tangent. Ultimately, graduated from West Albany High School, class of 2006. That was about the time that it was time to go to college. Where was I going to go? I applied around to a couple of different universities, ended up being accepted at Oregon State University, wanted to stay local. So September of 2006 is when I officially moved to Corvallis and have been here pretty much ever since.
That's really cool. So you've had a variety of different lifestyles here in the Mid-Valley because you've lived in Albany and Corvallis, which are our bustling miniature urban metropolises, but you've also lived in the more rural outskirts, Scioto's small town vibes, and there's a lot of agriculture in and right around the Tri-Cities, as no one calls it, right? And I would think of Scioto as being, a lot more quiet in that regard. So that's a really neat opportunity for you to have a lot of different perspective on what the Mid-Valley is like and, lifestyles and how to serve the people.
Absolutely. And I have family that lives over in Lebanon. I got family that's out now in Silverton and other parts of the state. And we actually, as my family, we like to drive around the state. A couple of years ago, we did a tour of the state looking for every covered bridge in Oregon. We got to find, it's the covered bridge tour is amazing because you get to see sort of the history of Oregon with these bridges, but then you also get to see these different communities all the way down to places like Cottage Grove and just out there. Not necessarily in our urban areas, but just how are these other smaller communities, developing and, just what type of livelihood do they have? And it's exciting to get around Oregon sometimes.
It is, yeah. I'm a big fan. I'm a transplant. I didn't grow up here, but I know a good thing when I see it, and I really love living in the Mid-Valley. So you're still living in Corvallis?
Yeah, so we live in Corvallis. We're actually up in the northeast part of Corvallis, off of Jack London. I usually tell people it's the manufacturer park behind the red storage units up there. So me and my wife, we've been, as I said, been here since 2006. She came a little bit later because she did a 2-year college community school up in Portland or in Beaverton before she moved down here.
Okay.
But we have our 9-year-old daughter who was attending Letitia Carson Elementary, but with the school closures this year, she'll be attending Mountain View. And then our 4-year-old son who is doing the preschool program through Corvallis High School.
So he's going to high school
well, yeah, he's going to high school, but it's with the preschoolers. And, the high schoolers love him. Awesome. This will be his second year going through the program, and they do a little mini graduation. And they say, some nice things about each of the kids. And when they talked about my son, they said he was the comedian of the class. So just both my kids, just like myself, my wife, my kids, we love talking with folks. We love hanging out. We're always encouraging, if we're at a new park or somewhere new, we're always encouraging our kids to go hang out with new kids. We're always wanting to talk with parents, just get to know who they are and what's going on. Yeah. And it's a lot of fun.
So when you speak to that kind of community, there's a lot of different facets of the community. What are some of your favorite things about living here now and raising your family here? I mean, you talked about the education component. What else do you think makes living in Corvallis and the Mid-Valley just a really awesome place to live and raise a family?
If you think about what Corvallis, what it translates to in Latin, Corvallis is translated as the heart of the valley, and it really is. We love going to the coast. We're about an hour from the coast. We can go up hiking into the mountains, or we can stay local here, and we have so many trails in the forests. We love going up to the McDonald Forest, up through Chip Ross. All of our parks we love. We'll go over to like the MLK and walk the trails there. We'll let the kids play. And really, it's just, Corvallis is really centered in a beautifully placed as a hub, because you can get, to Salem, down to Eugene, over to Bend, maybe a little bit 3-hour drive, but you can get over to Bend. And it's just really great where we are, and just to be able to get around the state. One of the things that, from our community that we've gotten really engaged with now that my daughter is getting older, I'm actually coaching softball here in Corvallis.
Oh, sure.
My daughter, she plays with the Corvallis Little League program, and I've gone into coaching, which I'll be honest, it's interesting because you're working with other people's kids. Sort of, it's a new appreciation for like teachers, because teachers are working with kids every day. And so when you're out there coaching during a practice or a game, and you're learning about, these young individuals, young ladies, and just how they interact with each other and interact with other adults, encouraging them through the hard times, but also, praising them when they've done great and helping them move through. And so we've become, engaged with other communities within the city. And it's just been a lot of fun. We love going to like our daughter's school events and activities. I will be honest, I will show up at my daughter's school randomly and surprise her with lunch. And I'm that one parent. I know not every parent agrees with this, but I will bring her McDonald's. And then
I was wondering if that's what you were going to say.
It becomes a special little thing with her, because now all the kids are like, what did you get there? What did you get? Why is your dad here? Why are you getting McDonald's today?
But that's the treat, right? I mean, when you're an elementary school kid, it's like, we've got a lot of fresh veggies and farm to table stuff. The treat is McDonald's.
Right? It is.
Yeah.
And so it's always fun when I do stuff like that.
Sure.
The schools love it when they see the parents, engaged. My favorite thing to do, and parents, dads, moms out there, rolling down that window during school drop off and going, yelling to your daughter or your son, going, "Hey, I love you," and just that embarrassing look on the kid's face, just for the fun. And
you have to.
And you know what? 5 seconds, she might be embarrassed, but we're going to look back on those times, because it's a lot of fun, because it's just who we are, and how you build a relationship with your own kid. And we just enjoy it. We enjoy getting out there with our kids and walking around and just enjoying our community.
I love it. Yeah. So if I recall correctly, because a lot of this is new conversation for me, we had lunch maybe a week ago to get to know each other in the first place. You mentioned that you're running for mayor, and the mayor position isn't actually a paid position, right? It is a volunteer public service position.
That's correct. So here in Corvallis, all of our elected positions are volunteer. They do get a small stipend. The mayor starts a little bit higher in the stipend, and then it works down depending on your position on the city council.
Okay.
But, you're talking 10, 15, 20 hours a week of extra volunteer time on top of having a full-time job.
And so that's where I'm going with that in my mind, is that really does self-select, true public servants. So you're a normal person with a normal job and family, and this is something you want to add on to that. Are we allowed to ask you what your normal job is and how you spend most of your time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So my job, I do work at Oregon State University. My job title, which is a little bit of a misnomer, but I'm called an IT consultant.
Okay.
I would say an IT specialist or IT support person, but the title is consultant. And really, I work within Student Affairs IT, and we're just supporting all the non-academic, non-athletic departments. So like your student housing, your rec center, the Memorial Union, and everything under that umbrella, the cultural centers. And we're just there to help them, who are helping support students get through their time at the university.
Excellent. I appreciate that. The university is a big part of our life and the energy of this community. Yeah.
It is, and it provides a lot of jobs, and it provides housing for students. It provides entertainment, whether it's the football games, whether it's the new prac center through arts and entertainment, whether it's the salmon bake with the cultural events. And so the university is more than just academic. It's a hub of activities for this community.
I totally agree. It's one of the things I appreciate about being here. I sought out being in a university town, even though I don't have a direct connection with the university at this point. So you've got your full day job and you're running for mayor. The elections are, of course, in November, but this isn't your first time actually doing something with public service. You were on city council, was it, earlier?
Yeah, so I served on the city council from 2019 until 2022.
Okay.
Had to step away because I did run for mayor 4 years ago, lost that election by 34 votes. And then I decided to come back again because people in this community have been talking with me and I've been talking with them, and they would really like to see me take another shot at it.
Okay. Well, this isn't intended to be a political channel.
I-
No. But hey, the 34 people that'll watch this video, please make a point of voting. Voting is important.
Yes,
you know?
yes.
And if we didn't like the mayoral candidate that we were talking with, we wouldn't have invited him to make a video today, right? So, I do know that our audience is mostly people who are probably looking to move here, but I hope that you can share this content with your platforms as well.
Yeah.
All right, so tell me a little bit about city council. What does that mean? And I do mean that. Like, I'm very naive with some of these things. I vote, I think that's very important. But what is city council, what did that look like for you, and what did you enjoy about it?
Ooh, that's a fun question. So what it looks like, at least in Corvallis, as of right now, we have 9 city councilors. We are the largest city council in Oregon. This November, we will be considering a ballot measure to reduce that to 6. That's a whole separate discussion. But really what it is, our city council, they're the policy makers for the day-to-day operations and the day-to-day livelihoods of a lot of people who live here. Whether that is setting utility fees, whether that is working within our franchise agreement with Republic Service and setting garbage pickup fees, whether that is making sure that our parks department or our police department has enough funding, or what's the right balance in those fundings, because the city council also works to help set the budget for those. And so it's really, it's like any city council, is that top level looking down for city policy, city operations. But then also, they are making decisions that, can impact development, land use issues.
Sure.
Whether or not somebody wants to move here because, there's extra fees or not extra fees on whether to buy a home or to develop a new home here, whether businesses want to come here. And so the city council, whether directly or indirectly, can be impacting, frankly, your livelihood, because you're dealing with, in the realtor business, city decisions impacts, that type of work. I also think about, the school district. I mentioned that my daughter went to one of the elementary schools here, Letitia Carson. It got closed by the school district because of enrollment numbers are down. And there's a variety of reasons, whether you want to talk about birth rates, students transferring, homeschooling. But, I also think, about the affordability issues that we have here in Corvallis, which I'm sure you want to ask me about at some point here.
But feel free to run with that, because we've had conversations earlier on the channel about cost of living, and that is a hot topic. This is a slow growth community, which kind of makes it a perfect storm for people really like how cute the neighborhoods are, but then supply and demand is very skewed. So
yeah, and unfortunately, Corvallis has been known for years as the #1 rent burden city in Oregon, and that's, at least in my mindset, isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And so when I talk about affordability in the school districts and stuff, we don't control what the school district does. We don't control their budgets or how, that interactions. It's more that direct impact. And so are we putting more, are we driving families to move out of Corvallis because they can't afford to live here? They can't afford the rent because there's that supply of housing is allowing landlords to increase those rents higher than people can afford to live here. And so there's policy decisions that the city and the city council need to be looking at to say, okay, how are we impacting working families? How are we impacting workers? And adjust that so that way we can control that affordability a little bit more.
Are these the kind of issues that inspired you to be doing your mayoral race?
Yes, absolutely. I'll be honest, if you would ask me 4 years ago after I lost my last election if I was going to run again, I would probably told you no. But over the last 3.5, 4 years, I have been talking with my neighbors. I've been talking with other parents at the schools through our softball programs, randomly hearing conversations as you're out, in a park or something, and people are talking about, the affordability issues. And so it really gets me, thinking about what can we be doing better and staying focused on the business of the city, helping businesses here in Corvallis, supporting them so that they, we're driving in the right businesses, incentivizing the right business to be here. One of the things I talk about, my daughter now makes a point to talk about when she's out campaigning with me. Yes, my 9-year-old daughter is literally my biggest fan running my campaign. I call it the car seat challenge. And we talked about this during lunch, where in the city of Corvallis, and I expand that sometimes to Benton County, being the full-size county, is where can we buy a car seat? Where can you go buy a crib or booster seats? I hear all the time, I can't buy shoes, I can't buy clothes for my kids here. We have maybe 2 or 3 stores who have limited options to shop for families here for their kids. I've been out door knocking as part of a campaign. That's what you do as a candidate. And one person says, where do I go buy to get work clothes? And so it's even people who are just workers, they don't have kids at home, but they're just trying to find workloads. And so that plays into that affordability because now individuals are having to use their gas money or money to buy gas and travel out of Corvallis, even though we're situated in a nice little hub area. That's real time. That's an opportunity lost on time with family and money. And so those are the things I'm really trying to focus on is like, what can we be doing to focus on the city, the business of the city, to grow those economic opportunities here and drive in new businesses that will support everyone that we want to say that makes us a friendly community and support everyone.
I think it's way better to think about how do we incentivize people and businesses to make these kind of decisions rather than try to crack down and govern from above, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. One of the things, and I could take this anywhere, right? There's so many opportunities that we have for this. 8 years ago, when I first got on the city council, I started being an advocate for our airport industrial complex, which industrial land, not a wonderful topic to always be talking about as a candidate. But when we start talking about affordability, putting utility fees and all this, well, if we increase the city's tax base by having more industrial land and building up, some warehouses or research facilities, that will then, expand our tax base, then which requires us to put more on people who live here and more on those utility fees. And so that's one option. Another option is looking more at our mixed-use facilities. So I know coming into downtown Corvallis, there's been an approval for a 14-story building that's supposed to be mixed use. It's going to have apartments and then businesses on the bottom. And there was, some tax incentives and some tax breaks that were given for that. But when we're talking about that stuff, what is the public benefit that's coming back to us? It shouldn't just be like, oh yeah, well, let's give you this tax break or this incentive. But what's that two-way street of that incentive? And so I think that's great. I think we could be seeing more of those type of buildings coming into our downtown. I know there's some other places like along 9th Street where it's sort of like a strip mall along 9th Street, but you could see some more of that housing coming along there.
We talk about like in our tours of town videos that like every college town has a 9th Street. They just call it some other road. Like when I moved from Gainesville, I think it was Archer Road or something. 9th Street is this long strip. It's almost as long as all of Northwest Corvallis, and it's got a lot of, restaurants and shops like Bed Bath & Beyond before they moved, right? Bowling alley, small businesses, Chinese buffets, all kinds of stuff, right? And some housing. So that's like the scenic route going north and south as opposed to taking the quick route from downtown all the way to the north side on 99. Yeah.
And a lot of that then plays into when you have areas like that spread out or you have the downtown that's a little bit more compact. If we can get more housing built in our downtown area, then you would have more residents down here who are able to shop and go to restaurants and just make Corvallis, at least the downtown, a little bit more lively, right? Revitalize that downtown core.
Sure.
And by building more along that 9th Street, sort of that same thing, which then we get around to talking about transit. Because Corvallis does have a great transit system, but it could be better.
Corvallis does have a great transit system, and I'm going to make air quotes when I say that it's free to the public. There's a surcharge on the water bill that everyone pays, right? A few bucks there, but that means that you don't pay to use the public buses, and the public buses have a hub in downtown and bike racks on the front and everything too. But as we talked about over lunch, it's like, but how could this be like really amped up, right? Like what other city, like maybe somewhere in Europe, is like the same size, but everyone really relies on the public transport as opposed to it being something that is added onto a car and bicycle culture. So ways to still improve on the public transport infrastructure and the buses are definitely on your mind.
Absolutely, because our major employers like Samaritan and Oregon State, at least definitely with Oregon State, there's been this talk about getting rid of, I shouldn't say get rid of, but move away from single vehicle occupants so that, it's not just one person driving their vehicle into campus. Getting to more carpooling, getting to more of that, mass transit. And, I love taking our bus system. My kids love it, especially, our 4-year-old loves it because he's like, oh, the city bus, let's go ride it. But for me to ride it to go from work where I live, it's about an 8-minute drive on a good day. If I was to take the bus, it could be anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes. And when you think about working families to get from where they live to work and then work back to home to be with their family, to go shopping, that's a lot of time that adds up, especially in a smaller community like Corvallis. And so when I start thinking about it, is like, where are those routes that are hitting up where there are more centralized housing, those more dense housing, and then those routes that will then get to the more populous working areas. So like OSU, Samaritan, downtown. And that's not to say our routes aren't doing that right now, but there are deficiencies in that, because I've heard these conversations. People are like, it takes so long for me to get from point A to point B on the bus. How can we improve this? And Does that mean we need more buses? Do we need to change up the routes so that way you have more than one hub? Because our main hub is downtown. There's a small one up by Timber Hill, but it's the Timber Hill shopping area. But it's not like a big one. It's a small transfer area. But what are we doing just to make sure that people can get around the city more quickly through their transit system? Our bikeways are great, so people love to bike. Corvallis is a great place to go biking. But there's just more options that we could be building on and really focusing on these conversations within our community.
It's interesting to hear that kind of comparison between your particular car commute versus bus commute, because an 8-minute commute is very expected, very typical in city limits. I mean, I like to call this a 15-minute city.
Yep.
It's like 15 minutes quarter to quarter. So we get very spoiled very quickly too, because it is very easy to drive around. Speed limits are low. It's very safe. It's great being here. And for a lot of people, like where I came from on the East Coast, a 30 or a 40-minute commute would just be normal. And they'd probably cross a state line in the process. So we do need to actually figure out how to make it easier for people to lean into the public infrastructure even more, and because it is there and can be improved upon. So I think that's a really interesting perspective, because there are people that we connect with through our YouTube channel that are moving here from Orange County, Los Angeles, I mean, big cities in like Texas, Seattle, Portland. They're like 30 or 40 minutes on a bus. Like, you don't know how good you've got it. And in some ways we don't.
Yeah, right.
But we're all about like really honing and perfecting what we've got here.
Right.
And I think that's worth improving on.
And if I can expand on that, is Corvallis is also considered a commuter city, where we have somewhere between 20 and 30 people who commute into Corvallis every day to go to work, go to school at the university, whether they're bringing their kids in to go to one of the grade schools here in Corvallis, to do business or whatever it is. And there are limited bus systems between those cities as well. And so how do we expand on that? So somebody who lives over in the city of Albany and works at Oregon State University, Samaritan, or somewhere else in Corvallis, they have a clear bus system. So because they're going to bring in the commuter bus from Albany, but then they're going to transfer to a Corvallis bus that might take them, 20 or 30 minutes around. So how are we, connecting those systems together? I know people who live over in Lebanon that commute in, Monroe, at Air Village. Like, how are we building around, not just Corvallis focusing on ourselves, but how are we working with our partners in other cities to expand on the transit system? But then there's also the housing issue. If we build up more housing, does that mean that we can get more cars off the road? Because those people who are living and commuting in on a daily basis, maybe they want to live here in Corvallis, and they can't afford it because the that supply issue that we've talked about is just not, we need to build that up. And so then we can get more cars off the road, which becomes an environmental issue, because Corvallis is a very environmental friendly community we like to talk about. And so there are things that we can be doing to help improve that. And part of that is building up that supply of housing, building up those businesses with the economic development, and just keeping more of those cars off the road and doing more of our shopping, more of our transit here within our own city.
So going back to some of the development that is coming into downtown, for example, we've got, I think, a couple of big development projects that are happening right now, right? And I'm going to mess up the names on the fly, but we've got the one that you were referring to, I think, like right over there where Taco El Machine used to be.
I believe
that's going to be 7 or 8 stories.
14. That's the 14.
Okay. And then we've got behind us over here the
Gordon Hotel?
Thank you. Yeah, the Gordon Hotel.
Yeah.
And that's going to be similar, right? Many stories, and it's going to have mix of like residential apartments, but also restaurants and commercial zoning down below.
That's my understanding. So one thing that's great about the Gordon Hotel is if you ever been down to Eugene, the 5th Street Market down there, it's the same owners. So they're the ones who own the Gordon Hotel down there and the 5th Street Market. And so their envision is to bring something similar like that to here, especially how close it is to our riverfront. So connecting their hotel and their apartments into the riverfront. That one might be a little bit more upscale with the housing, but I know there's supposed to be some affordable housing because of the tax incentives that were brought into that. But it's ultimately all housing is housing for our city right now.
Sure. I mean, there's a need for it. Yeah. And so part of the pros and cons, right? I mean, we've got some development coming in. There's not going to be parking for it immediately, and so that's a challenge. But it also is providing housing that's already in downtown on bike paths with bus systems. So as you said, it'll get people more centrally located and not necessarily commuting as much too.
And and that gets us to the conversations that have been happening about revitalizing our downtown, right? And just what can we do to prop up our businesses down here? I was just over at the Plaza, which is over at Madison and 4th.
Yeah.
I believe that's right.
Yeah.
And they just unveiled a new restaurant that's coming in here, Birdie's Pizza over in Philomath.
I think I saw you on the Facebook post from
Yes.
my realtor friend Lee over there.
And it was really exciting. Like there was music, there was entertainment. People were playing bingo, trivia with like music where you were like listening and then you would like, did they play that song? You would write it down. There was some trivia stuff. And Lee, who's a wonderful business proponent here in our downtown, my understanding is he actually bought pizza for everybody that showed up.
Yeah.
So everybody walked away with a slice or two of pizza from Birdie's Pizza, and they're coming in. I believe they're going to be opening in September down there. So it was just a lot of fun just to see. There is a lot of excitement about the revitalizing of our downtown and bringing new events and activities into our downtown area.
Is third space the term for some of what's happening here? Like creating third spaces where people are like, okay, I hang out at home, I hang out at work, I want this other space to go to. Almost mini community centers. We have a community center, but almost like mini community centers. Am I quoting this right?
That'd be actually my first time hearing that term, but I like it. That the third space. I go back to my daughter and her softball program. So we've been at least for this year, from pretty much March through June, July, we were out at Wheelings Field, which is right across from Sheldon Middle School up on Northeast Conifer. And that was our third space because we were out there almost every day, every other day, doing some type of volunteer work out there, right? And so, that became our second or third home. Whether it was, I'm at work. We love to come downtown and hang out. Now that our kids are starting to get a little bit older, especially with our son now being 4, and he is becoming a little bit more adventurous, like a 9-year-old, we've been going to places like Sky High, American Dream, and just getting them engaged with what's going on downtown. Because as everyone knows, kids can be a little picky sometimes, and we're slowly moving out of that picky phase where we're like, okay, let's go do something different with them, and so we're actually really enjoying the next phase of even our family time.
Sure. And I'm probably misusing the term third space. I'm quite likely butchering that concept, but I'm doing my best. So don't feel like if you're watching this video, you need to aggressively correct the use of third space in the comments. We'll look it up. We'll learn more about it later. And you're referring to Sky High and American Dream. Sky High Brewing Company, great place downtown. Yep. They've got a brew pub, restaurant. That was where we got to have lunch with you the other day. And they've also got a rooftop, which has some like outdoor games, beanbag toss, stuff like that. And American Dream Pizza downtown is pizzeria. There's a bar attached to it, the Crowbar. And they also have a rooftop that is open seasonally. And that's a great spot. I love both of those.
And I'll tell you, right now that we've gone to Sky High quite a few times with my son, anytime we come up over the Harrison Bridge into Corvallis, and he looks over and goes, there's Sky High. Or we're driving through downtown and he sees it, like that. To him, that's just like the new thing to really latch onto.
Absolutely. So what additional ideas do you have that could be really neat ways to incentivize the kind of revitalization, the kind of development and businesses that you'd like to see coming into Corvallis and our downtown to make that happen? I don't know much about politics. Like, how do you incentivize these things?
Yeah. So one of the things down in our South Corvallis area, so everything that's 3rd Street and down in our South Corvallis area, we have what's called our urban renewal district down there right now.
Okay, so that's different than the urban growth boundary.
Correct, and that's taking what is called incremental tax financing, and redistributing the property taxes into projects for development, whether it's for businesses or housing projects. And right now there's a recommendation to do the same thing here in downtown Corvallis.
Okay.
So drawing a border around downtown Corvallis and saying we should have a district down here where we will freeze all of our property taxes for the downtown area, and anything that increases over the years will be re-put into this area of a district. And so that could be new projects that could be put towards businesses, redoing, the roadways, whatever projects that we want that those dollars to be going towards. Right now they're doing a study of what that would look like.
Okay.
But that right there is one way where we can say, okay, we're going to have this extra pot of money to be doing projects to bring in businesses, to bring in housing. We can talk about tax breaks or, incentive tax breaks. I know that's not always the most fun thing to people hear. Well, why are you giving a tax break to X developer or X business? But, sometimes that's a way to get folks in. But also then, what are the benefits that they're bringing with them? And so, it's not just, oh, here's a tax break and, it's a blank check. But what's that incentive that you're going to be bringing? What type of businesses are you going to be attracting, or how much housing or how much, rent controlled or low income housing can you build if you were given this tax break? Yeah. And so there's that balance there that you can work out. Developing is not cheap, and that. And we've had that conversation during lunch. Like, If you want, actually, if I can turn that around back on you, what have you been hearing from developers, and what they're wanting to see here in
Yeah.
Corvallis?
Yeah, I mean that goes back to a little bit of our lunch conversation from last week. It's challenging. I mean, I'm currently actively marketing a redevelopment property. And when I say redevelopment, it's a parcel of land that's got a house on it, but it is zoned conducive to having much more housing on it than just one house for one family. So it's a middle housing project, I believe, is really the best term for that. And so as part of marketing that property, I'm constantly reaching out to not just other agents, but also, builders and developers and business owners. And I do hear a lot of builders and developers are like, Corvallis is hard to work with because we have a historically slow growth mentality, right? It used to be actual legislation. At some point, maybe 10 years ago, I feel like there was some House bill that changed it, right? It used to be, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Right.
It used to be that if you wanted to get new land annexed into the urban growth boundary, the public did get a vote on that, and they would basically just say no. And at some
That changed while I was on the city council. So here in Corvallis, in our charter, we did have a requirement that any annexation, regardless of size, was sent to the voters, except for in case of emergencies, like somebody needed to annex it so they can get on the water line or something, or sewer line or something like that. So there was like an emergency exception. But any type of annexations were in our city charter, and the state, because they got more aggressive, because Corvallis is not the only place that has housing issues. They got more aggressive with policies and saying, nope, you can't be sending things out to votes of the people anymore, and your city councils need to be making the decisions.
Okay, so it was legislation, and even though it's not exactly the same way now since 6 years ago, the slow growth mindset is still there.
Yes.
Right. And so I do hear from builders that they're like, oh yeah, I'd love to develop that property, but Corvallis is just going to be hard to work with. Right. They say things like, and I don't know how literally accurate this is, but they say things like, I can go to Albany or even Adair, and 8 days later I've got a permit and I can start breaking ground if I already own the property. They're like, and in Corvallis, it's just going to take forever to get permits and it's going to be expensive. So that's something that I hear a lot.
Okay.
And I don't know what the solutions are to all these things, because part of what makes Corvallis feel so neat, and when I say feel, I mean like the neighborhoods are just really cute. It's kind of an intangible. It's not easy, to quantify that, but the neighborhoods are cute, the housing's very cohesive, and it's, I think, in many ways because the zoning has always been so tight.
Right.
So how do you reconcile having things still be really cute and desirable while also being accessible? Because we do need more housing, and we need housing that people can afford, because you need to have people of all different ages, socioeconomic statuses, financial abilities, living, breathing, working in a community, doing all sorts of different jobs.
Right.
It can't just be that, you have to be a millionaire to buy a house or something, right? We need people doing everything here.
Yeah.
So
And if I can, I think you're speaking to what I've heard over time with my time on the city council, is there's a cycle of housing. A young college student or a young family, they're going to be looking more for like that studio or that apartment type, that type of housing. And then as you get older and you start becoming more financially dependent, or not dependent, financially independent. Let me get the right word there. Financially independent. Or you start having that little bit bigger family. For us it was our first kid, and then we have our second one. You start wanting that your first home, and then as you start getting older and stuff, do you want to move into a bigger home, or do you keep that same side of home? But then as you become getting ready for that retirement age, are you keeping that bigger home, or are you wanting to downsize?
Yeah.
Are you wanting to move into like a retirement home? Or are you wanting to move into back into a townhome or to apartment, something that that's a little bit more lower scale, something that's less upkeep? And we really don't have that full housing cycle, or at least from my perspective, or in some conversations I've had, because it is really hard for families to shop for homes here in Corvallis.
Yeah, Corvallis is more expensive than the surrounding areas. There's no beating around the bush with that. Yeah.
And then over time, I've heard Oregon State University, our major research university here, is they need to do more housing. They need to develop more housing for students. Fortunately, they are breaking ground this summer on a new residence hall. And my understanding is they have planned for 2 new ones over the next couple of years. So they'll have 3 new resident halls coming on the next couple of years.
7th and Western, something like that?
Something like that. Yeah, it's Western, right across from the soccer field and the softball field. So it's right there. You can't miss it. If you go drive down Western Boulevard, fences are up. I think I saw some construction vehicles out there today. So they're literally breaking ground.
Okay.
So, more housing will be coming there. But then you come back to the downtown housing. We talked about that 14-story apartment building. Is that going to be geared towards students? And our downtown is actually fairly close to the university. It's within walking distance. And so are we building up more housing downtown that maybe is towards students or towards worker, people who are working, so that way they do their shopping and their foods, food shopping down in Corvallis, they go to restaurants, but they're not walking to the university because it's convenient for them. And then does that get, right now we have a lot of students who live in single family homes, and landlords are renting, they're renting them in a 4-person bed, home to, 5 or 6 people because they can, because they're splitting the bedrooms up, and they're treating them like mini apartments, for the lack of better terms. And so if we get more of those apartments, downtown, does that bring more of those students out of these single family homes, which then gets back to, families and working families who are ready to move in those type of housing, which then in a way for me is stabilizing the housing in Corvallis. And so we kind of need it all. I remember back in 2019 when I was first coming onto the city council, we had a land use case for Bonaventure, which is a retirement home community. They have a great facility over in North Albany.
They have the North Albany and a Salem one too, right?
Yeah. Yep. And so, and that was approved in 2019, and here we are in 2026. And I think there might be starting to break ground on that, or starting to work on that project again. And so, part of that was because of what happened through the 2020 and 2021 with COVID and financing for stuff like that. But it's projects like that, like we need more, retirement homes. We need all of the type of housing to help the whole cycle of housing and everyone in our community, so that they, whether they're wanting an apartment, studio. Yeah. I live in a manufactured home, and we were very fortunate that we were able to, to get in there when we did. And so, because if we weren't able to get that home, I don't know if we'd be able to afford a home in Corvallis. And we may be having a different conversation today, or might be having a conversation over in Albany or Lebanon about this.
Yeah. And it's interesting having this conversation with you today, because I'm actually selling a home for a friend of mine that is, I'm going to say, somewhat recently retired, and they are moving from their kind of like medium-sized single-family home into a condo somewhere else. And that has nothing to do with Corvallis prices. It was more dictated by weather conditions. Oh. They're just like, I need to move to a warm place. That happens in retirement. I love clouds. This is paradise for me. But I know a lot of retirees that are like, I'm going to move somewhere warmer. That's definitely a thing. But the weather component aside, yeah, we could totally use some more senior living that is just really accessible. I feel like there's a development in East Albany going in, or in the planning process, that's going to have some mixed-use commercial and some like multi-level condos with elevators, right, so that every level is main level living for seniors. Yep. That kind of stuff would be very advantageous. So that makes a lot of sense to be aware of those kind of needs. So going back to your mayoral candidacy, all right, let's be cautiously optimistic. We use that term all the time in real estate, cautious optimism. All right, so when you get elected, what are some of the priorities, things that you want to be able to take action on sooner rather than later to help improve this lovely community that you want to serve? I mean, what are some of those things that you feel like you can really dive into?
Yeah, so one of the first things that the next council that's going to be taken up, that gets seated in January, will be the conversation of that the revitalization of our downtown. Whether we're going to be doing that urban. So one of the first things I think really that's going to be helping with this next council that gets seated in January is the revitalization of downtown. They'll be needing to take up the conversations of that urban renewal district, what that looks like, if and when that's going to be sent to the voters, because any urban renewal districts for Corvallis, it's in our charter that goes to the voters. And how are we going to defend that? How are we going to speak to the people and educate them about what that means and how does that work? Because when people hear taxes, whether it's incremental tax funding or urban rural districts, they think it's a new tax. But it's really not. It's taking the property taxes that are coming in and then it's re-putting it back into that district. And so that type of education. I know the city has system development charges, and they have those charges are there to help fund new development, or as they're building new roads or waterways, help replace things that, like, I'm drawing.
So SDC charges, they go for, you're saying like roads, waterways, parks,
wastewater, and the way those SDCs are calculated are based off what projects are going to be over the next 20 or 30 years. And so we're looking at those projects and say, okay, are these projects are actually the priority, in the next 10 or 20 years, and do we need to remove some of those projects to help reduce those SDCs? Or do we need to say, for the next 2 years, do we need to remove SDCs or put a moratorium on them. So that way that will help incentivize development, because SDCs go to the developers. Developers are the ones who are paying those SDCs. And that's whether you're looking at like an ADU, a single family home, a new business, you're wanting to. And so what are we doing to help? You go back to your question about incentivizing. Like,
Yeah.
and that's not saying I'm against SDCs, because SDCs are what cities need sometimes to help bring in new water lines or new roads.
But this is a tool in the toolbox
Yes.
that you can use to
Yep.
to adjust other things. Yeah.
And so that's one tool. We do have our utility bills. We do put a lot on our utility bills here in Corvallis. We have your standard, what's your water bill and your, but we also put on there, road maintenance fees. We have a sidewalk maintenance fee. You mentioned earlier, we put our bus transit on there, but we also have our police and fire. And so how are we balancing those increases? Because like anyone, the city has increased expenses, just like any business or any household, like expenses are going up. Yeah. It's a real thing. Inflation's a real thing. And cities are affected by it as well. And so, but where are we finding that balance and looking at that budget? Because we can't keep putting more on our residents that currently live here. What are we doing to increase that tax base? I mentioned earlier, last thing.
Oh, no,
I'll let you get a word.
You give me a lot to think about. I like this. Yeah.
I mentioned early on, I would love to see the annexation of our airport industrial complex. And that is something, the city can take real intangible action on, and bringing that in, which once you bring that in, you can start, talking about what type of development is going to happen there. And the reason I bring that up is right now it is in the county. It's outside the city limits. And a lot of that land is owned by the city. And so for any new development to happen there, for anything to come in, you have to jump through county hoops for land use planning and for permitting. But then you also have to jump through city hoops because the city owns good chunks of that land. And so you're jumping through two governmental hoops through that. And so if you annex it into the city, you don't have to go through the county anymore. And so that would then help incentivize that development, because now you're removing one additional barrier for development down there.
Absolutely. It's really interesting when you were talking about the SDC, the system development charges, a moment ago. It made me think about just how much people love ADUs, because you brought up ADUs, so accessory dwelling units, which is when you have, let's say, for example, like you have a house, but the zoning is conducive to it, there's space, there's access, and you can build like a small apartment in the backyard, for example. There's a lot of ways to do it, right?
Sometimes it's referred to as granny's home or grandma's home.
Yeah, totally.
So that's another thing, is like I'm living in the main home, but then I have a family member who can no longer afford to live their home, or they just want to downsize. And so we build a second smaller home in the backyard, and that's just where they're living now.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be detached. There's accessory dwelling units that are like garage conversions or add-ons. There's different ways to do that. But from a real estate perspective, from a realtor perspective, I should say, people love ADUs, and a lot of our clients want them, but there's not that many people that have already built them, right? So that's something that's very much in demand. It's a great housing option. It's a way that you could also be living on your property, but house a family member, house a student, for example, get some supplemental income, which takes some housing pressure off in general. But one of the challenges is that there's going to be SDC fees, right? Yep. So if you can at least, temporarily adjust that as a tool in the toolbox to make it easier for people to actually make these ADUs, then that's a really neat way to make another housing option more accessible that people want to do, but don't necessarily always have the money to make happen.
Yeah. And then, there's the city side of the things where they, you get a little, I don't want to say greedy, but, it's like, well, if you're increasing more ADUs and that type of housing, that increases the tax base for property values, which then brings in more taxes into the city, which, yes, city love property. In Oregon, we love our property tax, at least from a city's perspective, because that's the primarily financing tool for a city, right? It's through property taxes. And so, yes, you may lose some SDCs up front, but maybe you're making that back up on the back end with more property taxes. So, there'll be a balance there, I think, in the long run.
It's really interesting to think about. Yeah. What are some other, from your perspective, what are some other social issues that are really inspiring you to be active in the community in this mayoral candidacy capacity?
Yeah, so one of the things that, as I've been out talking with folks, whether it's been through this campaign season or leading up to this year, is wildfires. And so, unfortunately, we are in Oregon right now. You're seeing a lot of wildfires, and up in Washington with the city of Spokane, you're seeing a major wildfire coming through Spokane.
Yeah.
And I've been getting questions. So, what is the city doing to be prepared for a wildfire here in Corvallis? Because lo and behold, we are surrounded by forests. That's one of the very unique things about Corvallis is we are surrounded by forests. We're surrounded by farmland. Up where I live, up in the north part of Corvallis, you have the Chip Ross Park, you have McDonald Forest. And what if something were to happen there, what is the city doing to prepare for that type of stuff? And so I've been, when I got that question, I'm like, that's a really great question. What is the Parks and Rec department doing? What is our fire department doing? What is, we have emergency preparedness office. And so what conversations are they doing with neighborhoods? And I know they do like drills, and they'll go and talk with neighborhoods about, okay, well, this is how you can do like your evacuation routes. But is that really enough? Like, what are we going into these forests and making sure there's the fire breaks and making sure that our residents are safe? Because that is a real fear for a lot of folks, is that those type of wildfires coming into our city. Another thing that plays into it is the environmental issues, and I kind of mentioned this already. We're putting more cars on the road because of people not able to shop here, people aren't able to live here, or they're commuting in. And so what are we doing to address that? What are we doing to get more bikes on the road, or to get more bus systems, getting more keeping businesses here in Corvallis so people aren't having to commute out. And so I'm trying to look at it from that environmental lens. I talked about the school district. The cities don't have control over the school district, but what are we just doing to support workers in general, whether it's in the school district, whether it's workers at Samaritan, at OSU. There's a lot of people who work in Corvallis who they look like things are going well, but quietly behind the scenes, they might be struggling and they're just not talking about it. And so what are we doing to support workers here? I will share, we have a lot of union workers here in Corvallis. I'm a union worker at the university. And so what are we doing to support them, and just making sure that people who, just need that extra little support are there to have that?
Sure. What would be your wish for our lovely city here for 30 years down the road?
A lovely wish for our city here in 30 years down the road.
What would be your vision for it at that point?
Wow, that is a wonderful question. I have not had that question before, so I'm going to take an extra 5 seconds here to think about that question.
Yeah.
I really think it's a community that people feel welcomed in, whether that you're a worker, whether you're a family, whether you're somebody who's here visiting, and you just, it's your first time being here, and you're just walking around, and you can feel, that this is a place to come and visit and be part of. I would love to see, more entertainment. We have great festivals. We have OSU and their, what they do. We have things that happen on the riverfront. But we've lost some things over the years, like with the Da Vinci Days. But open streets is a great thing here in Corvallis, where you close the streets between two major parks, and people are able to walk up and down the streets. But seeing that more often, seeing things like that happening, increasing in our transit system we've talked about, and just having community where people they feel like they can be here at all times, and they're not having to commute out, they're not having to go somewhere else. And that if they're leaving our city, if they live here and they're leaving the city, it's because they're going to go visit somewhere else because they want to, and not because they necessarily have to.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, that's interesting to bring up things like open streets, because it's been neat to see that coming back a little bit, as the case may be. Da Vinci Days, I might mess up the verbiage here. I feel like Da Vinci Days isn't a thing anymore, but the Grand Kinetic Challenge, the race, is back, right?
Yep.
I mean, we've done videos on both of those things, but again, I don't want to mess up the verbiage between Da Vinci Days versus the Grand Kinetic Challenge, that kind of thing.
Yep. And the great thing about open streets this year was it was here in downtown. So it was from the riverfront of where the water fountains are all the way down through, this is 2nd Street, right?
Yeah.
So all the way down through 2nd Street, right here in front of your office, and into the skate park here. And so people were all day up and down walking the streets, seeing the booths and the tables. It was just a lot of fun just to be able to walk in 2nd Street. And I'll be honest, that gave me an opportunity to envision what it would look like if we had the pedestrian street downtown.
That's true. I've gone to big cities for like real estate conferences before, and there are entire streets that are just blocked off for cars.
Yeah. And so, I made a video during open streets, and it got some positive review and then some negative review. But, my thought was, because you have the Gordon Hotel that is being built in downtown Corvallis here at Madison and First, right at the riverfront. Looking at, Madison, closing that off for a pedestrian walkway. And then if you keep going up Madison, you'll hit City Hall, and you'll go past the plaza, you'll go past, I believe the White Side is on Madison, so you're going up through some of these businesses, and then you hit City Hall, and then you hit OSU. Madison goes right into Oregon State and some of the new buildings that they're doing with residence halls. And so, and many have considered, that Madison entryway, that pedestrian walkway, the real entrance into OSU.
Sure.
And so how are we connecting all the way from the riverfront up to Oregon State? And so then you've got prospective students, you got prospective families that are experiencing that full walkway of downtown. Now, I'm no expert on what it takes to have a pedestrian walkway. Obviously, you'd be crossing 3rd and 4th with Highway 99 and ODOT and all that. But what are we doing to think outside the box, to try something different? And that's what I've heard a lot from folks is, can we just think outside the box and try some different things?
Yeah. Well, I got to say, I really appreciate just how easy it is to, once an introduction had been made, connect with you and have a very substantial conversation over lunch and get to do something like this. And I really do sincerely hope that having this conversation out on the internet ends up being very helpful for you as you have your vision and goals in your mayoral candidacy, as well as just your hopes for our community. So I really appreciate you taking the time. So, gosh, this is really interesting. This is probably a much longer conversation than I would have expected. Oh, it's fine.
I'm enjoying myself. I'm glad that we got connected.
Yeah.
And you can cut this part. I don't know what it is about realtors, but for some reason in our community, sometimes realtors get a bad rep. But realtors are also part of our community. You're part of what's happening. You're honestly sometimes the boots on the ground of hearing what developers are hearing. And so part of what I want to do if I'm elected mayor is be talking to our businesses, be talking to our realtors, talking to people who are actually the boots on the ground and hearing these things. Because honestly, if we're not having these conversations, and how am I going to learn as mayor of what's actually happening, and then we can adjust, and we can take things to the city council, take things to the city staff, be like, hey, this is what we're hearing from folks who are working and what we need to adjust, and how can we find solutions to make these adjustments? Because otherwise we're working in a black box and we assume we know what we know, but really we don't. And sometimes these conversations are really good. And so I don't know where that comes from. Maybe it becomes you're the middleman when it comes to this buying and selling homes, but sometimes you're also the people who we need to be talking to because you know what's happening.
We're small business owners that ideally are very involved in the community as well because we care about it. And you can't do anything on the internet without somebody saying something bad about it, right? I mean, that's just part of internet apparently these days. So sometimes people write comments intended to be mean, being like, oh, these are the people raising your property values. I'm like, isn't that literally what people hire me to do? It's like sell their house for the best price and terms? All right, fine. I know that there's a slightly different conversation there.
But to turn that around, if you're working with a buyer, is to work with a buyer to get the best, lowest prices possible too.
There you go.
Because I know when we worked with our realtor as a buyer, she did her best to help us bring our, the price down. And, when we did our inspections, well, the roof was going to be replaced. And so, working through our realtor to say, okay, let's knock off X of dollars. I can't remember what it was, but to get, a better deal. And so I would say realtors are on both sides of that coin. You're trying to get the maximum value for some people, but also trying to get the lowest price for some people, depending on what you're doing in the market at that time.
And I don't know much about politics, as I already said, but it's maybe kind of like being in politics. We are needing to serve sometimes both sides, even of a single transaction, do so with skill and integrity. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a conflict of interest, right? I mean, you're just trying to help people and facilitate something that both sides want to have happen in the first place.
Yeah. I would definitely say that's like politics, because I have an opinion, and with a city council that's 9 individuals, each of the other city councilors have an opinion. And sometimes it's not one person's right and one person's wrong. It's what's the best in the middle to work for everybody.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean split the difference.
Not always. Sometimes it does, but not always.
Yeah. But one of my favorite negotiation books is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. But that's not the point here. Andrew, it's been very fun, and I've learned a lot in getting to talk with you today and over lunch last week. And I really appreciate that as a mayoral candidate that you are this accessible. So if people want to connect with you in any way, shape, or form, tell us a little bit about how they can do that. What are the social media channels? What's your website? We'll put a QR code, stuff like that up on the screen right now. How can people get in touch with you and get to further these conversations?
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me is either through my website, struthersformayor.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. If you search Struthers for Mayor or Struthers for Corvallis Mayor, same way, you'll find me on there. My email, if you prefer to reach out through email, is just andrew@andrewstruthers.net, and we can put that up there so you can get the spelling. But really the best way to get a hold of me is either to call or text, and I'm more than accessible that way. My number is 541-974-7240. Probably the best way to get hold of me that way is through texting, because I do work just like this, that 8 to 5 type of job. And so I may not answer right away, but I will tell you, when I was a city councilor, I actually had my cell phone up on the city's website, and I prefer people to call me directly to my cell phone because, that's just the best way to get hold of me.
You're obviously very amenable to being boots on the ground and having these conversations with the people that you very strongly desire to serve. And I find that inspiring. So thank you for all that you're doing for our community and for all that you hope and plan on doing. And I want to see you succeed. And it means a lot that you take the time to get message out there and help people get to know you so that you can be an effective public servant in the process. I really hope that this is very fruitful for you too. So please do use these clips and get them out there. And folks, obviously, I run a real estate team here. This is yet another video that's not about selling houses, but we were happy to be a resource for you anytime you need us, just as people who are boots on the ground in the community. So even if you're watching this and you might not be moving here or visiting here for 6 months or whatever, just reach out to my team. We're happy to connect on a casual Zoom call, answer questions, show you things on the maps. It's fun being a resource. And that's what makes my job fun too. It's not just selling houses, it's the people. So Andrew, thank you for being so eager to serve our people. And I really will be looking forward to seeing the results that you get, and I'm rooting for you. And we'll make sure to put QR codes up there too, so that for our local friends and constituents, if they want to donate to your campaign, that they have an easy way to do it as well.
Thank you, Michael. And I guess my last comment is say, we did talk about quite a few different issues, around Corvallis, but Corvallis is a great community. Corvallis is a great community. Just like any city, any community, there's just things that we need to work on to even improve it even better.
For sure. That's what you're here to do. Yeah.
So thank you, Michael, and thank you for your time today.
Right back at you. All right. Thanks so much. And as we say, bye for now.